Tamara kneels in the dirt in front of the wheelchair. A 15-year-old boy with twisted arms looks at her point blank. "Did you bring me into this world like this?" he asks. Behind him stands his mother, a shovel raised above her head. Tamara closes her eyes and clutches a baby booty in her fist, the same one that was thrown in her face 15 years ago in that courtroom. Now it will all end, one way or another. Dear friends, before we continue, write in the comments what country or city you're listening from. Enjoy the story. Post Office Station 14 in the county seat of Maplebrook smelled of dust, old paper, and quiet desperation. Tamara Whitmore, 42, sat at a wooden counter sorting envelopes. Her hands moved mechanically. Letter to the right, notice to the left, junk mail into the trash. She could do it with her eyes closed. Sometimes she did just that. October rain started falling outside the window. The gray sky blended with the gray roofs of the strip malls, and the whole world looked like a faded photograph forgotten on a windowsill. Tamara glanced up at the wall clock, 1:45. Another 45 minutes until the end of her shift. Then the bus, an empty apartment on the 3rd floor, tea and Oreos, some Netflix show, and a sleeping pill. Every day the same. Every day like a slow death. The bell above the door chimed. Tamara looked up and saw the mail carrier, Stevie, a young guy with perpetually nervous eyes. "Ms. Whitmore, certified letter, for you personally." He held out an envelope. A plain white envelope with a blue stamp. Return address, Law Office of Harrison and Palmer, Willow Creek, Crawford County. Willow Creek. Tamara felt the blood drain from her face. Her fingers, reaching for the envelope, trembled and froze in the air. "Ms. Whitmore, you okay?" Stevie looked at her with concern. Yes, I'm fine." She took the envelope. The paper felt cold, as if it had been stored in a freezer. Or maybe it was her hands that had turned to ice. Stevie left. Tamara stared at the envelope for a long time, not daring to open it. Willow Creek. She hadn't been back there in 15 years, not since the night she left on the last Greyhound, clutching her bag of documents to her chest and swearing never to return. Finally, she opened the envelope. 2 sheets inside. The first, an official notice printed on letterhead. "Dear Ms. Whitmore, we hereby inform you that your grandmother, Irene Ellen Whitmore, born 1938, passed away on October 3rd, 2024. According to her will, you are the sole heir to her property, which includes a residential home at 17 Meadow Lane, Willow Creek, and a land parcel of approximately 1 acre, as well as the personal belongings of the deceased. To process the inheritance, please appear at our office within 30 days. Tamara turned the page. The second sheet was handwritten, a large, slightly shaky script she would recognize among 1,000 others. Grandma Irene. My granddaughter Tamara. If you're reading this letter, it means I'm gone. Don't cry. I lived a long life and I have no regrets. Almost none. Come back to Willow Creek. Pay the debt I couldn't settle for you. You know what I mean. The Millers are waiting. Your grandmother, Irene." The letter slipped from her fingers and fell to the floor. Tamara stared down at it, unable to move. The Millers, Zoe Miller and her son, the same ones. She didn't remember finishing her workday, didn't remember getting home. She only came to her senses in the kitchen, sitting at the table, staring at the empty wall. The clock showed 11 p.m. The kettle had long gone cold. The Millers are waiting. What could she possibly tell them? What could she have done differently that night when she could still hear the faint cry of a newborn every time she closed her eyes? Every February, she bought a blue baby booty and burned it in the sink because she didn't know how else to get through that date. Tamara opened the cabinet above the sink. Behind the boxes of Cheerios was a bottle of Jack Daniels. She pulled it out, unscrewed the cap, and brought it to her lips. The smell of whiskey hit her nose. She hadn't had a drink in 15 years. Tamara set the bottle on the table, stared at it for a long moment, then stood up, poured the contents down the drain, and went to pack her things. The bus to Willow Creek departed from the station at 6 in the morning. Tamara stood on the platform, clutching a small duffel bag. Everything she had after 15 years of living in Maplebrook. A change of underwear, a few sweaters, her documents, and an old photograph of her grandmother. The bus turned out to be an ancient model with faded curtains and the smell of diesel. The driver, a heavy-set man in a greasy cap, looked at her without interest and waved his hand. "Get on." Tamara settled by the window. Besides her, there were 3 passengers, an elderly woman with a basket of cabbages and 2 men in work overalls. Nobody spoke. The bus pulled away, belching a cloud of black smoke, and drifted down the morning streets. Beyond the town, the fields began, bare and brown, with rare patches of unharvested corn. October had turned the world into a watercolor with blurred edges, gray sky, gray asphalt, gray trees. Crows sat on the power lines like black notes on a musical staff without a melody. Tamara looked out the window and remembered. She'd left Willow Creek at night that same October. Only then, it was even darker. The streetlights hadn't worked for 3 months, and clouds covered the moon. She ran down the muddy road, stumbling and gasping for breath. Behind her, the house with a smashed window and words spray-painted on the fence, which she'd managed to read by the beam of a flashlight. Baby killer. The neighbors didn't come out to say goodbye. They'd come out earlier, with baseball bats, crowbars, and rocks. Someone threw a stone through the window. Someone shouted, "Get out while you're still breathing." Deputy Sheriff Thompson arrived an hour later, when the crowd had already scattered. He looked at the broken windows, shook his head, and said, "You should leave, Tamara, just to be safe. Folks around here carry grudges, you know." She knew. 3 months before that, she'd been acquitted in court. Officially. Legally. With a verdict and seals. But for the residents of Willow Creek, she would forever remain the one who'd crippled Zoe Miller's baby. And no court could change that. The bus hit a pothole and lurched. The woman with the cabbages gasped and hugged her basket. One of the men lit a cigarette despite the no smoking sign. The driver didn't even turn around. After 2 hours, a sign appeared. Willow Creek, 3 miles. Tamara's heart sank. She knew this road by heart, remembered every curve, every crack in the pavement. Over there, behind the tree line, was the pond where she used to catch tadpoles with her grandmother as a child. And there was the farm where Zoe Miller used to work. The bus entered the village. The same sagging houses, the same crooked fences, the same water pump on the corner where women with buckets used to discuss everyone else's business. Only now everything seemed smaller, poorer, more hopeless. Or maybe she was the one who'd changed. "Willow Creek, end of the line," the driver called out. Tamara stepped off. A cold wind hit her face, bringing the smell of wood smoke and manure. A familiar smell. The smell of childhood. The smell of nightmares. She stood at the empty bus stop and looked down the main street of the village. A grocery store with a peeling sign. A town hall with a crooked flag. A community center with boarded-up windows. And in the distance, around the corner, the roof of house number 17 on Meadow Lane. Grandma's house. Her house now. Tamara sighed, grabbed her bag, and walked down the muddy road, trying not to think about what awaited her. Grandma Irene's house stood at the edge of the village, fenced off from the neighbors by a tall hedge of lilac bushes. Tamara stopped at the gate. The same weathered boards, the same rusty latch. She pushed the gate open. It creaked plaintively. The yard was overgrown with weeds. The apple tree, which used to bear fruit every fall, stood bare and seemed dead. The porch steps sagged. But the house itself was still standing. Whitewashed walls, blue shutters, though the paint had peeled in places. The chimney intact, the windows whole. Tamara climbed the steps, pulled the key from her pocket, the lawyer had mailed it to her, and opened the door. The smell hit her first. Old wood, dried herbs, something sweet. Grandma always kept apple slices drying above the stove. Tamara stepped inside. The entryway with worn rugs, the kitchen with an ancient Kenmore stove and a table covered with oilcloth, The living room with a sagging couch and a TV from the 90s. Everything exactly as it was 15 years ago, as if frozen in time. On the table lay a photograph in a wooden frame. Young Grandma Irene in a white apron holds a baby in her arms. Behind her, the same house, only new, freshly painted. Tamara picked up the photograph, turned it over. On the back, a faded inscription. Tamara, 3 days old. The first one I welcomed into my new home. She stood for a long time, holding the photograph and crying quietly. The next morning, Tamara went to the notary's office, a small building at the other end of Main Street between the hardware store and the barber shop. The notary, a plump man in a worn suit, shuffled papers. Everything's in order, the house, the land, all yours. Just sign here and here. He pointed to the lines. Tamara signed. Was there anything else my grandmother left, she asked? Any other instructions? The notary rummaged through the folder and pulled out a sealed envelope. She asked that I give you this after you signed the papers. Tamara took the envelope and opened it right there. Inside was a handwritten note. Tamara, in the attic under the old trunk there's a box. Open it, and then go to the Millers. Zoe lives on the same land in the old trailer. Her boy is 15 now. His name is Danny. Don't be afraid. Fear leads nowhere. I love you. Grandma Tamara returned home and climbed into the attic. Dust, cobwebs, old furniture covered with sheets. She found the trunk, a massive oak chest that had belonged to her great-grandmother. She pushed it aside with effort. Underneath was a small cardboard box. Inside the box lay documents. Medical records, yellow with age. Notes in her grandmother's handwriting. And one more item, a blue baby bootie with an embroidered teddy bear. Tamara sat on the floor and began to read. The documents told a story that Tamara had remembered differently, or perhaps had chosen to forget. 15 years ago, February, a snowstorm that knocked out power across 3 counties. Tamara was 27, a registered nurse working at the county hospital in Crawford. She'd come to Willow Creek that weekend to visit her grandmother. That night, Zoe Miller went into labor. Zoe was 19, unmarried, 8 months pregnant. The baby's father, some trucker she'd met at the diner where she worked, had vanished as soon as he found out about the pregnancy. Zoe lived alone in her mother's old trailer on the edge of Miller's Creek, a mile from the village. The ambulance couldn't get through the snowdrifts. The county road was blocked. Phone lines were down. There was no cell service. There never was in Willow Creek. Someone ran to Grandma Irene's house. Everyone in the village knew that Irene Whitmore had been a midwife for 40 years, had delivered half the babies in Crawford County. But Grandma Irene was 71 years old and had recently suffered a stroke. Her hands shook. Her vision blurred. Tamara will go, she said. She's a nurse. She'll handle it. Tamara remembers the flashlight beam cutting through the blizzard, the narrow path to the trailer, the door that wouldn't open at first because snow had piled against it. Inside, dim light from a kerosene lamp. Zoe on the bed, drenched in sweat, screaming. Blood. Too much blood. And then everything went wrong. Tamara read her grandmother's notes, written shortly after the trial. The baby presented with shoulder dystocia. Tamara did everything right. She performed the McRoberts maneuver. She applied suprapubis pressure. The baby was stuck. Without an emergency C-section, both mother and child would have died. Asterisk. Tamara saved them both. But the damage was already done. The brachial plexus injury happened during birth. It happens in 1 to 2 births per 1,000, even in hospitals with full equipment. Zoe never understood this. She wanted someone to blame, and the village gave her someone. Tamara kept reading. More notes, more documents. A letter from a doctor in Cleveland, dated 3 years after the birth. I examined Daniel Miller, age 3. The brachial plexus injury is consistent with birth trauma from shoulder dystocia. Such injuries are not necessarily the result of medical malpractice. The prognosis for recovery is limited, but not hopeless. With proper physical therapy, the child may regain partial function. But Zoe had never taken Danny to Cleveland. She'd never gotten him physical therapy. She'd spent those years nursing her hatred instead. And then, at the bottom of the box, another letter. This one in Grandma Irene's handwriting. Never sent. Dear Zoe, I am writing to tell you what I could not say in court because the lawyers would not let me speak. The night Danny was born, Tamara saved your life and his. Without her, you both would have frozen to death in that trailer before morning. The injury to Danny's arms was not her fault. It was no one's fault. It was God's will or fate or simply bad luck. Call it what you want. But you have spent 3 years blaming my granddaughter for something she did not do, and the village has helped you drive her away. I should have said this sooner. I should have stood up for her at the trial, but I was afraid. Afraid of you, afraid of the neighbors, afraid of losing the only community I have ever known. I was a coward, and my cowardice cost Tamara everything. Forgive me, granddaughter, and forgive me, Zoe, if you can find it in your heart to see the truth. Irene Whitmore. Tamara sat in the attic until dark, the papers spread around her. Then she gathered everything into the box, climbed down, and made herself a cup of coffee. Tomorrow she would go to the Millers. The trailer sat in a hollow by the creek, half hidden by overgrown brush. It was the same trailer, older, rustier, but still standing. Smoke rose from a crooked stovepipe. Tamara walked up the muddy path and knocked on the door. No answer. She knocked again. "Go away!" A woman's voice, harsh and tired. "Zoe, it's me, Tamara Whitmore." Silence. Then the door flew open. Zoe Miller stood in the doorway, 40 years old now, though she looked 60. Gray hair pulled back in a messy bun, lines carved deep into her face, eyes that held nothing but exhaustion and old anger. "What do you want?" "My grandmother asked me to come." "Your grandmother's dead." "I know. She left me a letter. She said the Millers were waiting." Zoe laughed, a bitter, ugly sound. "Waiting? Waiting for what? For you to finish what you started?" "Zoe, please. I just want to talk." "There's nothing to talk about." But Zoe didn't close the door. She stood there, gripping the frame, and something flickered in her eyes, something that wasn't quite hatred. "Is Danny here?" Tamara asked. "Don't you dare say his name." "Please, Zoe, just let me see him. Let me explain." "Explain what?" Zoe stepped forward, her face inches from Tamara's. "Explain why my son can't hold a fork? Why he can't tie his own shoes? Why he'll never—" Her voice cracked. She turned away. And then, from inside the trailer, a voice. "Mom? Who's there?" A boy appeared in the doorway. Tall for his age, thin, with dark hair and pale eyes. His arms hung at odd angles, the fingers curled inward. Danny Miller. He looked at Tamara without recognition. Why would he recognize her? He'd been a newborn the last time she saw him. "Who are you?" he asked. Tamara opened her mouth, but no words came out. Zoe grabbed Danny's shoulder and pulled him back. "Nobody. She's nobody. Get inside." "Mom, inside!" Danny gave Tamara one last curious look, then retreated into the trailer. The door slammed shut. Tamara stood there for a long time, staring at the peeling paint. Then she walked away. That night, Tamara couldn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table with her grandmother's papers spread before her, reading and rereading the unsent letter. I should have stood up for her at the trial, but I was afraid. All those years, she'd thought her grandmother believed what everyone else believed, that she was guilty, that she'd hurt the baby through negligence or incompetence. All those years of silence, of not talking about it, of pretending it never happened. And all along, Grandma Irene had known the truth, had wanted to speak it, had been too afraid. My cowardice cost Tamara everything. But whose cowardice was it, really? Tamara had run. She'd let them drive her out without a fight. She'd spent 15 years hiding, working a dead-end job, living a half-life in a town where nobody knew her name. She could have fought. She could have stayed. She could have demanded that people see the truth. But she'd been afraid, too. The next morning, Tamara drove into the county seat, 30 miles of winding road through autumn hills. She went to the library and spent 4 hours at the computer researching. Brachial plexus injuries, shoulder dystocia, physical therapy outcomes, surgeons who specialized in nerve repair. She printed everything, organized it into folders, made notes. Then she drove back to Willow Creek and knocked on Zoe Miller's door again. This time, Zoe didn't answer at all, but Tamara could see movement behind the curtain. "Zoe, I left something on your doorstep. Medical articles, information about treatments for Danny, specialists who might be able to help." She paused. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just want Danny to have a chance." No response. Tamara set the folder on the step and walked away. 3 days passed. Tamara spent them cleaning her grandmother's house, sorting through decades of accumulated possessions, old clothes for donation, broken furniture for the dump, photographs for keeping. On the 4th day, someone knocked on her door. She opened it to find Danny Miller standing on her porch, alone. "Hi," he said. "Hi. I read the stuff you gave my mom." He held up the folder, wrinkled now, clearly well-thumbed. "She threw it out, but I got it from the trash." Tamara stepped aside. "Would you like to come in?" Danny hesitated, then rolled forward. She noticed now that he was in a wheelchair, an old manual chair, badly maintained. His arms couldn't push the wheels effectively, so he used his feet to scoot along the ground. "Can I make you some tea?" Tamara asked. "Or hot chocolate?" "Hot chocolate," Danny said, "if it's not too much trouble." Tamara went to the kitchen. Danny followed, looking around at everything with bright, curious eyes. "This was your grandma's house?" "Yes." "She delivered me, didn't she? Everyone says so." "No." Tamara set water to boil. "I did." Danny went quiet. When Tamara turned around, he was looking at her steadily. No fear, no anger, just intense interest. "Tell me what happened," he said. "The real story, not what Mom says, not what the village says. The truth." So Tamara told him. She told him everything. The blizzard, the blocked roads, the impossible choice between trying to help and doing nothing. She told him about shoulder dystocia, about the maneuver she'd performed, about the moment when she'd thought both he and his mother were going to die. She told him about the trial, the acquittal, the mob with baseball bats, about running, about hiding, about 15 years of guilt. And she told him about her grandmother's letter, the confession of a woman who'd been too afraid to speak the truth. Danny listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You saved my life." "I don't know if—" "You did. Mom would have bled to death without help. I would have suffocated. You saved us both, and you got punished for it." Tamara felt tears burning in her eyes. "Danny—" "I want to walk," he said suddenly. "Those articles, they talk about surgery, about therapy, things that might help." He looked down at his twisted arms. "Mom says there's no point. She says I'll never be normal. But I want to try." "Then we should find you a doctor," Tamara said. "A real specialist, not the ones around here." "How? We don't have money. We don't have insurance." "There are programs, grants, charitable organizations." Tamara pulled out her phone. "Let me make some calls." The weeks that followed were the busiest of Tamara's life. She made calls, dozens of them. She contacted hospitals in Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia. She researched grant programs for children with disabilities, reached out to charitable foundations, wrote letters explaining Danny's case. Most doors closed, but a few opened. A surgeon at the Cleveland Clinic agreed to evaluate Danny, pro bono, as part of a research program on brachial plexus injuries. A foundation offered to cover travel expenses. The Shriners Hospital expressed interest in providing follow-up care. Through it all, Danny came to visit nearly every day. He wheeled himself down the muddy road from the trailer to Tamara's house, often arriving with homework or questions. "What's this word mean?" he'd ask, pointing at some medical term. "That's neuroplasticity. It means the brain can learn new pathways, even after injury." Danny nodded thoughtfully. "So maybe my brain can figure out how to use my arms better, even after all this time?" "Maybe. That's what we're hoping for." Zoe found out, of course. In a village like Willow Creek, nothing stayed secret for long. One evening, she appeared at Tamara's door, not knocking, just standing there, arms crossed. "What are you doing with my son?" Tamara met her eyes steadily. "Helping him." "I didn't ask for your help." "No, but he did." Zoe's face twisted. "You think you can buy forgiveness? Think if you fix him, everyone will forget what you did?" "I didn't break him, Zoe." The words came out quiet but firm. "I never broke him. What happened that night, it wasn't my fault. It wasn't anyone's fault. But you needed someone to blame, and I was there." "How dare you?" "I've spent 15 years running from this. 15 years believing I deserved everything that happened to me. But I don't, and neither does Danny." Tamara stepped closer. "He has a chance, Zoe. A real chance. But he needs surgery, therapy, support. He needs you to stop telling him he's worthless." Zoe slapped her. The sound cracked through the evening air. Tamara's cheek burned, but she didn't flinch. "Feel better?" she asked. Zoe's hand trembled. Her eyes were bright with tears. "I hate you," she whispered. "I know. I've hated you for 15 years. I know." "And I'm so tired," Zoe's voice broke. "I'm so goddamn tired of hating you." She sank down onto the porch steps and covered her face with her hands. Her shoulders shook. Tamara sat down beside her, not touching, just present. "I was 19, Zoe said through her fingers. 19, pregnant, alone. And then my baby, my beautiful baby." She couldn't finish. "I'm sorry," Tamara said. "Not because I did anything wrong, but because it happened. Because it was terrible and unfair, and you were alone and nobody helped you understand." Zoe looked up. Mascara streaked her cheeks. "Your grandmother tried. Did you know that? She came to see me after the trial, tried to explain. I threw her out. She never told me. She kept coming back. Every few months she'd show up with food, with hand-me-down clothes for Danny. I took the stuff, but never let her in." Zoe wiped her face. "She was kind, kinder than I deserved." They sat in silence as the sun set behind the hills. "The surgery," Zoe said finally. "Is it dangerous?" "There are risks, but the doctors are hopeful." "And if it doesn't work?" "Then we'll have tried. Danny will know that people fought for him." Tamara turned to face her. "He's a remarkable kid, Zoe. Smart, curious, determined. He wants to live a full life. Let him try." Zoe was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. 3 months later, Tamara, Zoe, and Danny drove to Cleveland in Tamara's old Honda Civic. 9 hours on the road, through the Appalachian Hills and across the Ohio plains. Danny sat in the back, unable to contain his excitement. "Look at those wind turbines. There must be hundreds of them." "Wind farm," Tamara said. "They generate electricity." "I know what they do. I just never saw them for real before." Danny pressed his face to the window. "Mom, are you seeing this?" Zoe glanced back. For the first time in years, she was smiling. The surgery took 7 hours. Tamara and Zoe sat together in the waiting room, not talking much, just drinking bad coffee and watching the clock. When the surgeon finally emerged, his face was cautiously optimistic. "We repaired what we could. The nerve damage was extensive, but there's healthy tissue to work with. Physical therapy will be crucial, months of hard work, maybe years. But I think he has a fighting chance." Zoe started crying. Tamara put an arm around her shoulder, awkward at first, then more natural. "Thank you," Zoe said. "Thank you for not giving up on him. Thank you for letting me help." Recovery was slow and grueling. Danny spent weeks at the Shriners Hospital, then months in outpatient therapy. Tamara drove him to appointments 3 times a week. Zoe took extra shifts at the diner to pay for gas and groceries. Somehow they fell into a rhythm. Tamara would bring Danny home from therapy, help him with his exercises, cook dinner while Zoe was at work. The 3 of them would eat together at Grandma Irene's old kitchen table, talking about nothing and everything. One evening, Danny looked up from his plate and said, "This is nice." "What is?" Tamara asked. "This. having dinner together, feeling like— He stopped, embarrassed. Like a family, Zoe finished softly. Danny nodded. Zoe and Tamara exchanged a look. Something passed between them. Not quite friendship, not quite forgiveness, but something close to understanding. Yeah, Tamara said, it is nice. The first time Danny lifted a fork to his mouth without help, they all cried. It happened at breakfast 6 months after the surgery. Danny had been working on it for weeks. The fine motor control, the coordination between his newly healing nerves and his struggling muscles. He reached for the fork. His fingers closed around the handle. Slowly, shakily, he scooped up a bite of scrambled eggs and brought it to his lips. I did it, he whispered. Holy crap, I did it. Zoe threw her arms around him. Tamara stood back, tears streaming down her face. After all those years, after all that pain and guilt and anger, something good had finally happened. By summer, Danny was walking short distances with a cane. By fall, he'd enrolled in the county high school, his first time in a regular classroom. The other kids stared at first, but Danny won them over with his quick wit and his refusal to feel sorry for himself. He discovered art. One of his teachers, recognizing his intelligence and his need for an outlet, gave him paints and canvas. Danny's hands still shook, his grip still wavered, but something magical happened when he put brush to paper. He painted the world as he saw it, vivid, emotional, unafraid. His first painting showed 3 women. The first, young, in a white coat with frightened eyes. Her hands were covered in blood, but she held a baby, gently, tenderly, like the greatest treasure in the world. Darkness surrounded her. A storm raged outside the window. The second, pregnant, a cigarette trembling in her fingers, tears on her cheeks, fear in her eyes. She sat alone in an empty room, smoke rising to the ceiling like a prayer. The third, an old woman in a white shawl, her face kind, wise, calm, her hands folded as if in blessing, and above her head, a halo from a bare light bulb, flickering but not yet gone out. At the bottom, a title, Those Who Accept Life, and below that, for my midwife, my mother, and my great-grandmother Irene, whom I never met, but who brought us together again. In November, the county held a youth art exhibition. Danny was invited to display his painting. The exhibition hall was in an old community center, high ceilings, wooden floors, the work of young artists hanging on every wall, watercolors, sketches, school projects. And in the center of the room, on its own stand, Danny's painting. Tamara saw it and stopped. Her legs buckled. She grabbed the display stand to keep from falling. Zoe stood beside her, tears streaming down her face. It's us, she whispered. He painted us. He painted the truth, Tamara said. Danny rolled up in his wheelchair. He still used it for long distances and looked at their faces. You like it? Tamara hugged him tightly the way she would hug her own son. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. The judges awarded Danny first place. They asked if they could keep the painting for permanent display. He agreed. Let it hang, he said. Let people look at it and think. Maybe someone will understand what we understood. The cemetery in Willow Creek was small, overgrown with grass, dotted with old headstones and newer monuments. Grandma Irene's grave lay in the far corner under an old rowan tree. Tamara came alone on a November morning. She placed white chrysanthemums on the grave. Grandma had always loved chrysanthemums, and sat on the bench beside the fence. You were right, Grandma, she said aloud. The wind stirred the branches. Red berries swayed like tiny bells. I paid the debt. Not the one you thought, though. A different one. I got back my right to live, my right to forgive, my right to be forgiven. She paused. Danny's a good kid. You knew that too, didn't you? He's got bright eyes and a kind soul. He's stronger than all of us, me, Zoe, even you. He looks at the world without hatred, without resentment. He just lives. A bird sang somewhere in the branches. Tamara listened. I'm staying, Grandma. I'll live in your house, help people the way you did, the way Mom would have wanted. She took a photograph from her pocket, old, yellowed, young Grandma Irene holding a baby. On the back, faded words, Tamara, 3 days old. The first one I welcomed into my new home. The circle is complete, Tamara said. You welcomed me. I helped Danny into this world. He'll help someone else someday. She stood, bowed to the grave, and stayed a moment longer. For the first time in 15 years, peace. Not happiness, not yet. That would come later, maybe. But for now, peace. Stillness inside. Reconciliation. Tamara turned and walked along the path toward the cemetery gate. The rowan tree shook its branches after her. The first aid post in Willow Creek was open every day except Sunday. Tamara saw patients from 8 to 6, sometimes longer if someone needed her. Zoe became her assistant. Not a nurse, she didn't have the training, but a helper. She scheduled appointments, kept records, took blood pressure when Tamara allowed it. They didn't become friends, exactly. What they had was stranger than friendship. 2 women who'd walked through hell and emerged on the other side. No longer enemies, not quite allies, but something without a name. Danny enrolled in an online college program. He wanted to become a physical therapist. I want to help people like me, he explained. People who had bad luck at the start. People who didn't give up. The new mayor, a young agricultural engineer named Tom Bradley, secured a grant for the first aid post. New windows, fresh paint, modern equipment. Tamara couldn't believe her eyes. Where did the money come from? State program for rural health care, Tom said. We submitted your reports. They were impressed. Life didn't become perfect. The village still struggled. Unemployment, young people leaving, roads falling apart. But something was changing, slowly, quietly. People smiled more. They said hello on the streets. They helped each other. Maybe it was coincidence, maybe not. Above Tamara's desk hung a frame. Unusual, with nothing inside except a pair of blue baby booties with an embroidered teddy bear. The same ones, washed, ironed, carefully mounted on velvet backing. Beside them, a photograph. Tamara, Zoe, and Danny in front of his painting at the exhibition, all 3 smiling. Patients sometimes asked, "What are those booties for?" Tamara smiled. "A reminder," she said, "that sometimes you have to walk through hell to find your way home." The patients nodded, not really understanding. But it didn't matter. The important thing was that she understood. Evening. Tamara locked up the first aid post, turned off the lights, and stepped onto the porch. The November sky was clear, the first stars appearing. Zoe and Danny were walking down the road, returning from the pond. Danny fed the ducks every evening, even when it got cold. "Miss Whitmore," Danny called out. "Want to come over for tea?" "Sure," she called back. "Mom made pie," Zoe added. "Apple crumble." Tamara smiled and walked toward them. The 3 of them headed down the village street together. The sunset painted the sky the color of ripe berries, like the rowan at Grandma's grave. Crows sat on the power lines, the same ones as 15 years ago, but they didn't seem ominous anymore. Just birds, just life, just a second chance that not everyone gets, but that all 3 of them had seized with both hands. Sometimes guilt is not a death sentence. Sometimes it's the beginning of the road to forgiveness. Tamara carried someone else's guilt for 15 years. Zoe carried her own. Danny carried no one's, because children are never to blame. They didn't become a family in the usual sense, but they became something that has no name. People who looked truth in the eye and didn't turn away. People who found the strength to forgive others and themselves. People who understood that the past cannot be changed, but we can change how we look at it. Asterisk. Could you forgive someone you blamed all your life? And more importantly, could you forgive yourself? Thank you for listening to the end. Other videos are available in the channel playlist, Timeless Words. It's on your screen now.